Marcus walked slowly through the tall glass doors of the corporate building with his head slightly lowered, the mop handle resting on his shoulder. He was the janitor, quiet, unnoticed, and almost invisible in the world of powerful men in dark suits and shiny shoes. His uniform was faded from years of washing, but he wore it with quiet dignity. Every day he arrived before sunrise and left long after the offices were empty, yet very few even knew his name. Life had never been easy for Marcus. He had grown up in hardship, and now, as a single father, he carried the weight of two roles, mother and father, on his tired shoulders. Years ago, his wife had passed away, leaving behind only memories and a little girl who needed him more than anything. That little girl was Amara. Amara was 12 years old, bright, curious, and full of questions about the world. She loved books more than toys and spent hours in the small public library near their apartment. Her favorite thing was learning new words from different languages. Sometimes she sat at the kitchen table, repeating them softly to herself, filling the air with strange but beautiful sounds. Marcus often watched her with a mixture of pride and sadness. He could see her potential, but he also knew how limited their life was. Every morning, before Marcus left for work, Amara prepared his lunch. It was a small meal, sometimes only bread with jam or rice with beans, but she placed it carefully in a metal box as if it were the finest food in the world. "Papa, one day you won't have to mop floors," she would say with complete confidence. "One day, I'll help you." Marcus never laughed at her words. He smiled, but inside he wondered how long he could carry on. His body ached from years of bending and scrubbing. The pay was small, barely enough for rent and groceries. At night, when Amara was asleep, Marcus often sat by the window of their tiny apartment and stared at the cracked ceiling. The city lights flickered outside, but in his heart, he feared a future that offered little more than survival. Still, Amara gave him strength. Her laughter filled the apartment with warmth, and her smile reminded him of his late wife. She was the reason he woke up every morning and put on that old uniform. She was the reason he endured the long hours and the silence of being invisible. At the company, Marcus moved quietly from floor to floor, pushing his cleaning cart. He polished the marble hallways, wiped the glass walls, and emptied trash bins. Most people passed him without a glance. Some gave him polite nods, while others walked by as if he were just another piece of furniture. Marcus never complained. He believed in dignity of work, no matter how small. But deep inside, he carried a quiet dream. He did not dream of riches or luxury. He dreamed of seeing Amara in a classroom where teachers encouraged her, where her talent was recognized, where she could use her gift with words. He dreamed of giving her opportunities he had never known. Amara often sat in the company's waiting lobby after school, waiting for her father to finish work. She would sit with her little notebook, scribbling words she learned that day. Some employees noticed her, but most walked past without paying attention. To Marcus, she was his little star, shining in a place where no one cared to look. Sometimes, when the hallways grew empty, Marcus would pause and watch her from a distance. He admired the way her small lips moved as she repeated words in French, Spanish, or even Japanese from books she had borrowed. She never realized her father was watching, but in those quiet moments, Marcus felt hope blooming inside him. Perhaps one day, her gift would open a door for her. Life continued in this rhythm, hardship balanced by love, exhaustion softened by hope. Marcus never expected anything to change. He believed his days would pass in the same silence until his body grew too tired to continue. But fate often works in ways no one expects. Sometimes, a single moment can turn the tide of an entire life. And for Marcus and Amara, that moment was waiting just around the corner. One evening, as Marcus polished the grand lobby of the company, he noticed a group of men walking in. They were not ordinary employees, their presence carried authority. Among them was a man everyone seemed to respect, the billionaire owner of the company. Marcus had seen him before only from a distance. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and always dressed in elegant suits. People stepped aside when he walked past, lowering their voices as if his very presence demanded silence. Marcus quickly stepped aside with his mop, keeping his head down. Amara, who had been sitting quietly with her notebook, looked up curiously. She had no idea that this man, this stranger, was about to change both their lives forever. That evening, as the lights reflected off the polished floor and the sound of footsteps echoed through the lobby, destiny prepared to open a door Marcus never thought possible. In the same building where Marcus mopped floors and Amara waited with her notebook, another world existed, a world filled with luxury, power, and decisions that affected thousands of lives. This was the world of Richard Hale, the billionaire owner of the company. Richard Hale was known across the city as a man of intelligence and strict discipline. His company traded with partners all over the world, and his empire was built on trust, precision, and sharp decision-making. He lived in a mansion on the hill, drove cars most people only saw in magazines, and wore suits that cost more than Marcus earned in a whole year. Yet behind his success, Richard was a lonely man. His wealth had given him many things but had also taken away something important: peace of mind. He rarely smiled, rarely trusted, and rarely allowed anyone close. His life was full of meetings, contracts, and foreign deals. He was always surrounded by people, but deep down, he often felt alone. That day, Richard had returned from a trip abroad. He carried with him a document written in a foreign language. It was important, so important that one wrong translation could cost him millions. He had asked his staff to find someone reliable to translate it quickly, but none of them had the exact skills needed. He was growing impatient. When Richard entered the lobby that evening, employees hurried to greet him, their voices filled with respect and fear. Marcus, standing quietly in the corner with his mop, kept his eyes down. He knew men like Richard lived in a completely different world. For people like Marcus, men like Richard were untouchable. Amara, however, was curious. She had seen the tall man enter, his presence commanding attention, his expression serious. She didn't know who he was, but something about the way others moved aside for him caught her eye. She held her notebook tightly, not realizing that destiny was slowly weaving her into his story. Richard spoke to his assistant in a sharp tone, frustration clear in his voice. "I don't care how you do it. I need this translated before the meeting tomorrow. If we fail, the deal is gone." The assistant nodded nervously. "Yes, sir. I'll try again to find someone tonight." Richard sighed, shaking his head. He glanced around the lobby, his eyes sweeping past the workers, the empty chairs, and then only for a second resting on Amara, who was scribbling in her notebook. But he dismissed the thought and walked toward the elevator. Meanwhile, Marcus finished his cleaning quietly. But he could not ignore the fact that his daughter had heard every word. Amara leaned closer to him when Richard left and whispered, "Papa, he said he needs someone to translate. Maybe I can do it?" Marcus froze and looked at her. "Amara," he said softly, "that man is the owner of this whole company. People like us don't talk to men like him. He is rich, powerful, and we are just," his voice broke a little. "We are just workers." But Amara's eyes shone with determination. "Papa, you always tell me every work has dignity. You also tell me that talent has no color, no wealth, and no limit. If I can do it, why shouldn't I try?" Marcus felt his heart swell with both fear and pride. She was so young, yet her words carried wisdom beyond her years. He wanted to protect her from disappointment, from the coldness of the world, but he also knew she was right. That night, as they walked home together, Marcus kept thinking about it. Their apartment was small and old, but inside, Amara spread her notebook across the table and began flipping through the pages. She pointed to words she had learned, sentences she had practiced, and passages she could already translate with ease. See, Papa, she said, her voice full of excitement. If he gives me the paper, I can understand. I know I can. Marcus sat back, watching her, his tired hands resting on his knees. He remembered his wife, who had always told him Amara was special. Maybe she had been right. Maybe this was the chance life was finally giving them. But fear held him back. What if she failed? What if they laughed at her? What if Richard grew angry? The thought of his daughter being hurt, even by words, made him hesitant. Still, deep down, Marcus knew that opportunities like this came once in a lifetime. Perhaps this was the door he had prayed for every night. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, casting golden light on the tall building where Marcus worked. As he tied his worn shoelaces and prepared for another long day, Amara walked beside him, holding her notebook like a treasure. Neither of them knew exactly what would happen. But something told them that their lives were about to change. And somewhere in his office on the top floor, Richard Hale still held that untranslated document in his hands, unaware that the answer he was searching for might be sitting quietly in the lobby below, waiting for the right moment to prove herself. The morning was busy inside the company. Employees hurried across the polished lobby, carrying files and speaking quickly on their phones. Marcus moved silently among them, pushing his cleaning cart, careful not to disturb anyone. His old uniform made him blend into the background, but his eyes were always alert. Amara sat on one of the chairs near the large window, her notebook resting on her lap. The sun shone through the glass, lighting her face as she scribbled notes. To others, she was just a child waiting for her father. To Marcus, she was his entire world. Upstairs, Richard Hale was growing restless. The document he had brought from abroad still lay on his desk, untouched and untranslated. Meetings had been delayed, calls postponed. He had contacted several experts, but none could provide an immediate solution. His assistant entered the office nervously. "Sir, we are still waiting for a translator. I tried 3 agencies this morning, but none can deliver before tomorrow," the assistant explained. Richard's jaw tightened. Tomorrow will be too late. If this is not translated today, the deal will collapse. His voice carried frustration. "Find someone. I don't care who. Just make it happen." The assistant bowed his head and rushed out. He stepped into the lobby, scanning the room for anything useful. His eyes landed on Marcus, who was carefully cleaning a corner near the elevator. He walked over quickly. "You there," the assistant said, his tone sharp but not cruel. "You work here every day, yes?" Marcus straightened, gripping the mop handle. "Yes, sir. I clean the building." The assistant hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Do you know anyone who can translate foreign languages? The boss is in urgent need. It could be important." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Amara, who was already looking up with wide eyes. She had heard every word. She stood and clutched her notebook. "Papa," she whispered, "this is my chance." The assistant frowned at the girl. "Your daughter?" Marcus swallowed, his voice low. She studies languages on her own. She has a gift. But she is only 12. The assistant almost dismissed the idea, but Amara stepped forward with unusual confidence for her age. "Please, sir. Let me try. If I cannot do it, you lose nothing. But if I can, it will help your boss." Her clear voice surprised both men. The assistant studied her for a moment, uncertain, but something in her eyes made him pause. Finally, he said, "Follow me. The boss will decide." Marcus's heart pounded. He wanted to protect Amara, to stop her, but he also knew this was the door she had been waiting for. With trembling hands, he placed the mop back into the cart and followed behind, his daughter walking bravely beside the assistant. They entered the grand elevator, its golden walls reflecting their nervous faces. Marcus kept glancing at Amara, silently praying she would not be crushed by disappointment. Amara held her notebook tightly, her small fingers steady despite her racing heart. On the top floor, the office doors opened. Richard Hale looked up from his desk, surprised to see a janitor and a young girl standing before him. His sharp eyes studied them with curiosity. "Who are they?" Richard asked his assistant. "Sir, this is Marcus, one of our janitors, and his daughter. She says she can translate." For a moment, silence filled the room. Richard leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "A child? You brought me a child to solve an international deal?" His tone carried disbelief. Amara stepped forward before her father could speak. "Sir, please give me a chance. If I cannot do it, you lose nothing. But if I can, it will help you." Richard raised an eyebrow. The girl's confidence intrigued him. He looked at Marcus, whose hands were clenched nervously. Then he turned back to Amara. "Very well," Richard said slowly, his voice firm. "If your daughter can translate this, I'll double your pay." His eyes locked on Marcus. "But if she wastes my time, you both leave this office immediately." Marcus's throat went dry. He wanted to object, to protect Amara from the pressure, but her small hand touched his arm. She gave him a reassuring smile, the same smile her mother used to give when life felt too heavy. Richard slid the document across the desk. The pages were filled with lines of a foreign language that looked complex to any ordinary eye. Amara took a deep breath, opened her notebook, and began reading. At first, the room was silent except for the sound of her voice. Her pronunciation was careful, her words clear. Line by line, she translated, her young mind recalling every book she had studied, every note she had written, every late-night hour she had spent whispering strange words to herself. Richard leaned forward slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing, not in anger but in growing surprise. The assistant's mouth hung open. Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding with every sentence his daughter spoke. When she finished the first page, Amara looked up. Her eyes were calm, her voice steady. "Shall I continue, sir?" For the first time in years, Richard Hale felt something unusual stir in his chest, curiosity mixed with respect. This was no ordinary girl. He gave a small nod. "Continue." And as she did, Marcus realized that the moment he had prayed for, the chance he thought would never come, was unfolding right before his eyes. The large office was silent except for the soft sound of Amara's voice. She stood straight, her small hands resting on the edge of the billionaire's desk as she continued to read and translate the document line by line. Her eyes moved carefully across the words, and her voice carried the rhythm of someone who truly understood what she was saying. Marcus stood nearby, holding his breath. He had never seen his daughter so calm in such an important moment. His heart swelled with pride, but fear lingered too. He kept glancing at Richard Hale, the billionaire whose expression remained unreadable. Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the girl. At first, he had expected her to stumble, to hesitate, to get lost in the complexity of the text. But instead, she moved smoothly, translating with a confidence that was far beyond her years. Finally, she reached the end of the document. She looked up at Richard and closed her notebook gently. "It is done, sir," she said softly. For a few seconds, the room stayed quiet. The assistant shifted nervously, unsure of what Richard was thinking. Then Richard slowly rose from his chair, picked up the translated notes she had written, and skimmed through them. His sharp eyes scanned every line, and the more he read, the more his face softened. He looked at Amara again, his voice firm but not harsh. "Where did you learn this?" Amara straightened her shoulders. "From books, sir. I borrow them from the library. I write words, practice them, and repeat them until I remember. I love learning languages. They make the world feel bigger. Richard studied her carefully. And you did this all on your own? No teacher. She nodded proudly. Yes, sir. My papa works very hard, so I do what I can with the library books. Marcus's eyes watered at her words. He wanted to say something, but his throat was tight with emotion. He had always known Amara was special, but hearing her speak with such courage in front of the most powerful man in the company filled him with a kind of pride he could hardly describe. Richard walked to the window, his hands behind his back. He looked out at the city for a long moment before speaking. Do you realize what you have just done, young lady? This document was meant for a high-level translator. A mistake could have cost millions. But you completed it perfectly. Amara's lips curved into a shy smile. I just tried my best, sir. Richard turned back to Marcus. And you have been working here all this time, mopping my floors, and never once did you mention that your daughter has such a gift. Marcus lowered his head. Sir, I did not want to bother anyone. I am only a janitor. Who would believe me if I said my little girl could do something so important? For the first time, Richard's face softened into something that almost looked like a smile. He walked back to his chair and sat down, tapping the desk lightly with his fingers. Well, I believe you now. More importantly, I believe her. He leaned forward and looked directly at Marcus. I said I would double your pay if she could translate. And I am a man of my word. From today, your salary is doubled. Marcus's breath caught in his chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes filled with tears, and he quickly looked down to hide them. But Richard was not finished. He looked at Amara again, his voice steady. Young lady, you are not just talented. You are extraordinary. Tell me, what do you want to be when you grow up? Amara hesitated for a moment, then answered with honesty. I want to travel, sir. I want to learn many languages, meet people, and help my papa live a better life. Richard nodded slowly. A noble dream. The assistant, still stunned by what he had witnessed, whispered, Sir, she could be useful to the company. Perhaps she could help with documents, or even train under someone. Richard raised a hand to silence him. She is still a child. She should be in school, not working. He paused, then said something that made Marcus's knees almost buckle. From today, I will sponsor her education. She will go to the best school, learn properly, and have every opportunity she deserves. Amara's eyes widened, and Marcus nearly dropped to his knees. Sir, we cannot accept. You will accept, Richard interrupted firmly. Because talent like hers should never be wasted. Consider it an investment. One day, she may do great things not only for herself but also for others. Marcus wiped his eyes, his voice breaking. Thank you, sir. You don't know what this means to us. Richard gave a small nod, then looked at Amara again. You have given me something priceless today, not just a translation, but a reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Do not waste this gift. Amara smiled, her heart pounding with happiness. She turned to her father and whispered, Papa, I told you one day things would change. Marcus placed his rough hand on her shoulder, his voice trembling. Yes, my child. You were right. In that moment, inside the tall office of the billionaire, the life of a janitor and his daughter began to shift. A door had opened, and beyond it lay possibilities they had never dared to imagine. And Richard Hale, the man who had once thought of them as ordinary, now saw them in a light that even he could not ignore. The next morning, Marcus walked into the building with a heart that felt lighter than it had in years. His old shoes tapped softly against the marble floor, but for the first time, he did not feel invisible. His daughter had turned the impossible into reality, and the billionaire himself had promised them a brighter future. Amara walked beside him, holding her notebook tightly. She looked around with new eyes, no longer just a girl waiting for her father in the lobby. She was still humble, still quiet, but inside her, a flame of hope had been lit. Upstairs, Richard Hale sat in his office, the translated document neatly placed on his desk. The meeting that morning had gone perfectly because of Amara's work. His international partners had been impressed by the accuracy, and the deal had moved forward without a problem. But Richard's thoughts kept returning to the girl. He had met many intelligent people in his life, but there had been something pure, something extraordinary, about the way she carried herself. She had not asked for money or praise. She had only wanted to help her father. That kind of loyalty and humility touched Richard in a way he had not expected. Later that afternoon, Richard called his assistant. "Find out more about that janitor and his daughter. I want to know everything: where they live, what school she attends, what they need." The assistant nodded. He had learned long ago never to question Richard's instructions. Within hours, Richard had the information. He sat in silence as he read the file. A small apartment in an old building. A single father working long hours. A child who taught herself languages from library books. Richard closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. He remembered his own childhood. Though he had grown up with more comfort than Marcus, he too had known what it meant to feel overlooked. His father had been a strict man who demanded perfection, never showing affection. Richard had built his empire partly to prove himself worthy, but in the process, he had lost touch with the softer parts of life. That evening, as Marcus polished the lobby floor, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned and froze. Richard Hale himself was walking toward him. Marcus straightened immediately, gripping the mop handle nervously. "Mr. Hale," he said quietly, lowering his head. "Marcus," Richard said, surprising him by speaking his name. "I wanted to thank you again. Your daughter's work saved an important deal for this company. But more than that, she impressed me. She reminded me that greatness can be found in unexpected places." Marcus's throat tightened. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you for giving her the chance. She has always dreamed of more, but I could never give it to her." Richard's eyes softened. "You gave her everything that mattered: love, guidance, and strength. Without you, she would not be who she is." For a moment, Marcus did not know what to say. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. To the world, he was just a janitor, but here was the billionaire himself, showing him respect. Richard continued, "I want you to know, Marcus, that I will keep my promise. Your pay is doubled starting this month. And as for Amara, I will personally make sure she attends the best school. She will not struggle the way you have." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, you are too kind. We are simple people. We have never expected such generosity." Richard shook his head. "It is not kindness, Marcus. It is justice. Talent like hers should never be hidden. And loyalty like yours should never go unnoticed." At that moment, Amara came running from the corner where she had been waiting. She looked up at Richard with her bright eyes and said softly, "Thank you, sir. I will study hard. I will not waste your trust." Richard bent slightly so his eyes met hers. "I believe you, Amara. And one day, I expect to see you not just as a student, but as someone who changes the world with your gift." Amara's smile was small but full of determination. Marcus placed a protective hand on her shoulder, his heart swelling with pride. The days that followed began to change quietly. Marcus noticed small differences: employees who had once walked past him without a glance now greeted him with respect. They had heard the story of the janitor's daughter who had amazed the billionaire. Some even smiled kindly at Amara when she sat in the lobby, as if they too now saw her in a new light. But for Marcus, the greatest change was not in how others treated him. It was in how he felt inside. For the first time in years, he no longer carried only fear of the future. He carried hope. And for Richard Hale, something had shifted as well. The hardened businessman who once thought only of contracts and profits found himself thinking of a little girl with a notebook and a father who worked tirelessly for her. It reminded him of values he had nearly forgotten: kindness, humility, and the power of belief. The story of a billionaire and a janitor might have seemed impossible to many. But within the walls of that tall building, respect had begun to grow between two men from very different worlds. And in the center of it all was a child whose hidden gift had opened a door none of them had expected. Life began to change quietly for Marcus and Amara after that unforgettable day in Richard Hale's office. The change was not sudden or loud, but steady, like the rising of the morning sun. Marcus still wore his janitor's uniform and carried his mop, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer walked with his head lowered in shame. His steps were stronger, his shoulders straighter. People noticed. Employees who once passed him without a glance now greeted him politely, and some even stopped to talk. Amara, too, was no longer just the little girl waiting in the lobby. With Richard's support, she was soon enrolled in one of the city's best schools. The first day she put on the new uniform, her eyes sparkled with excitement. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar nervously, then turned to her father. "Papa, do I look like I belong?" she asked softly. Marcus's voice trembled with emotion. "You belong anywhere your heart wants to go, my child. This is only the beginning." The new school was bigger and brighter than anything Amara had ever known. At first, she felt small in its wide hallways, surrounded by children from wealthy families. Some of them stared at her with curiosity. She carried no fancy bag, no expensive shoes, only her old notebook, the same one filled with words she had been writing for years. But soon, her talent began to shine. Teachers were astonished at her ability to grasp new languages with ease. While other students struggled with lessons, Amara answered with confidence, her voice clear and steady. She was not proud or arrogant, she remained humble, always ready to help her classmates. Slowly, respect replaced curiosity, and she began to make friends. Meanwhile, Marcus worked with renewed energy. His doubled pay meant he could finally cover the bills without fear. He even saved a little each month, something he had never been able to do before. At night, when Amara studied at the table, Marcus sat beside her, repairing old shoes or sewing a torn shirt. Every so often, he looked at her with quiet wonder, hardly believing how far they had come. Richard Hale, too, continued to watch from a distance. Though he rarely showed his emotions, he kept track of Amara's progress. Reports from her teachers reached his desk, and each time, a small sense of pride touched his heart. He saw in her the promise of something greater than wealth, a reminder that determination and love could build futures even stronger than money. One afternoon, Richard called Marcus to his office. Marcus walked in nervously, still unused to being summoned like an equal. Richard gestured for him to sit. "Marcus," he began, "I have been observing your daughter's progress. She is not only gifted but also hard-working. Many children with talent waste it, but Amara values it. That comes from your upbringing." Marcus lowered his eyes. "I only did what any father would, sir. She is my light. I would give everything for her." Richard nodded slowly. "And you have. That is why I want to do more. I am arranging for Amara to join an advanced program for young scholars. It will give her opportunities far beyond what ordinary schools can offer. She deserves it." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had no words. All he could manage was a whisper, "Thank you, sir. You are changing our lives." Richard looked at him with rare softness. No, Marcus. Your daughter is changing mine. She reminds me of values I had forgotten. As months passed, Amara blossomed. She was invited to school competitions, where she stood on stage and translated texts with grace and confidence. Marcus sat in the audience during each event, his eyes shining with tears as he clapped the loudest. Other parents whispered about the janitor's daughter who could speak so many languages, but Marcus no longer felt shame. He felt only pride. At home, their small apartment felt warmer. The fear of unpaid bills no longer haunted them, and laughter filled the rooms more often. Amara still helped her father with little chores, still packed his lunch, but now her dreams stretched far beyond their walls. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Amara rested her head on Marcus's shoulder. "Papa," she whispered, "do you think Mama can see us from heaven? Do you think she knows what is happening?" Marcus closed his eyes, holding her close. "Yes, my child. She sees you, and she is proud. She always said you were special. Now the world is finally beginning to see it too." And so, their lives continued to change step by step, day by day. A janitor's life, once marked by struggle and silence, was now touched by respect and hope. A little girl, once overlooked, was now seen as a shining star. And above them, Richard Hale, the billionaire who had once lived in a world of walls and wealth, found himself learning the greatest lesson of all: sometimes true treasure is not gold or power, but the courage and love hidden in ordinary people. The morning sun shone gently through the windows of Marcus and Amara's apartment. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, the small home was filled with laughter and quiet excitement. Today was not an ordinary day. It was the day Richard Hale had invited them to the company headquarters for a special meeting. Marcus dressed in his best clothes, something he rarely wore, and Amara adjusted her school uniform carefully. Her hair was tied neatly, and her notebook rested in her bag, though today it was empty. She did not need it. The world had already begun to open its doors to her. As they entered the lobby, Marcus felt a strange mixture of nervousness and pride. Though their lives had already changed, something told him that this visit would mark another turning point. Richard Hale greeted them personally, a rare gesture for the billionaire. He smiled, though faintly, as he guided them to his office. "Marcus, Amara," he said warmly, "today is about recognizing courage, talent, and dedication. You both deserve this." Marcus's throat tightened. He had never imagined such words coming from the man who had once seemed untouchable. Amara held her father's hand tightly, sensing the gravity of the moment but remaining calm and composed. Richard gestured toward a small table in the corner, where a folder lay neatly stacked. "Marcus," he began, "your hard work and honesty have always impressed me. But today, I want to do more than just double your pay. I want to offer you a position in the company that suits your experience and dedication. You will manage the building operations, lead the cleaning staff, and ensure the workplace runs smoothly. The pay is substantial, and it comes with benefits that will support your family." Marcus could hardly believe his ears. "Sir, I don't know what to say," he stammered. His eyes filled with tears, and Amara squeezed his hand, sharing in the moment of joy. Richard smiled faintly. "Say nothing for now. Actions speak louder than words. You will start immediately if you wish." Then he turned to Amara. "And as for you, young lady," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I want to continue supporting your education. You have a rare gift, and it must be nurtured. I have arranged for a scholarship to an international program for gifted children. You will learn languages, travel, and explore opportunities most people can only dream of." Amara's eyes widened, her small hands covering her mouth. I don't know what to say, sir," she whispered. Richard chuckled softly. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you will work hard and continue to dream big." Talent like yours is rare, and I expect you to make the most of it. Marcus placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, his eyes shining. See, my child. I told you dreams do come true if you believe and work for them. Amara smiled, her heart full of gratitude. Papa, we made it together, she said softly. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet, almost surreal way. Marcus was introduced to the staff he would now manage. They greeted him with respect, and some even shook his hand warmly. Amara met a few of the program coordinators who would help guide her studies. Everything felt new, exciting, and full of possibility. As the meeting ended, Richard walked them to the elevator. He paused and looked at Marcus. Remember, Marcus, loyalty, honesty, and love are worth more than money. You have shown all three. Never forget it. Marcus nodded, tears in his eyes. I won't, sir. Thank you for believing in us. Richard then turned to Amara. And you, young lady, remember that the world is big and full of challenges. But with courage and knowledge, you can face anything. Never let fear hold you back. Amara straightened, her voice steady. I will not, sir. I promise. As they stepped out of the building and into the bright sunlight, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The future, once uncertain and filled with struggle, now looked bright and full of hope. Amara skipped slightly ahead, her laughter ringing in the morning air. That evening, back in their apartment, Marcus sat on the small sofa and held Amara close. Look at us, my child, he whispered. We've come so far, and it's all because of you. Amara hugged him tightly. No, Papa. It's because of you too. You never gave up, and you always believed in me. That's why we are here. Marcus smiled, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and overwhelming love. For the first time in years, he felt truly free from worry. He knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger than ever. And somewhere high above, Richard Hale watched from his office, thinking about how a small act of courage and a father's love had reminded him of the true meaning of success. Not money, not power, but the power to change lives and inspire hope. That night, as Marcus tucked Amara into bed, she whispered softly, Papa, one day, we will help others the way Mr. Hale helped us. Marcus kissed her forehead. Yes, my child. And we will. This is only the beginning. Outside, the city lights sparkled like stars, and inside that small apartment, two hearts were full of hope, full of love, and ready for the bright journey ahead. The janitor's life had transformed. The little girl's gift had opened doors they had never imagined. And in that simple, quiet triumph, both father and daughter discovered that courage, love, and belief could truly change the world.